Hi, everyone. It's Fred Oduyoye and Rick Lawrence here to talk about reachable reconciliation again. Just as a reminder, Fred has pioneered an approach to reconciliation in all organizations, including the church, which he calls the 5 R's. It's good for us to remember those right off the bat. The 5 R's are relationship, reactions, reflection, repairs, and reaching. Those are the 5 R's. And Fred and I are going to be talking about topics underneath all of those 5 R's as we go forward. And today we're going to talk about something under the R of reaching. So Fred, you were telling me about one important filter to have when you're thinking about reaching others is understanding the stereotypes and perceptions that we have and how they limit our ability to reach. Can you tell a little bit about what you mean by that limitation in our ability to reach?
Sure, Rick. I mean, in any of these conversations, I always have to start with myself and think about how do I engage a room? What experiences have I had when I had to enter into a space or enter into a different environment that maybe I might be uncomfortable with, or I could be one of a few, right? In terms of um, a person of color or a male or whatever it may be. And so when you think about reaching, even as I think of myself, the first thing that comes into play is what's in my brain? What's happened in the past? You know what I mean? What experiences have I had? What's the information that my mama or my daddy gave to me or my grandmama? What happened in my neighborhood or in my house or something that I overheard? All these things come into play and it can affect my ability or inability to reach out to someone else or to even serve and support um, something that we feel is, like a just, a social justice cause, right? Um, and those things become difficult when we counter it with information that may be misconceptions.
Hmm. Yeah. And when we were talking before we started recording, you even used an example of how this works with maybe your relationship with animals. And that sparked in me I remember when I was a kid in elementary school, I had to walk down this sort of pathway between two homes. And it was kind of a long fenced in pathway, almost it felt like a tunnel walking through this every day going to school. And one day I was walking alone down that tunnel and I saw an animal walking toward me, and the animal was making this funny sound. I couldn't figure out what it was, but when it got closer, I realized it was a cat and it had a live bird in its mouth. And I had this visceral reaction, like it made me so angry that this cat was sort of torturing this bird and the bird was crying out, that I just reflexively, I kicked the cat. And when I kicked the cat opened its mouth and the bird flew away.
Wow.
And from that moment, I hated cats. I was just disgusted by cats. And then I married someone who had a cat. I married into a cat. And I
Right.
discovered by actually having a cat as part of my household that I love cats. But I had all of these years where I had this impression of cats that was really negative. And then I actually lived with one and I grew to really love cats. I have 2 cats today. So it just reminded me that, wow, that's what it's like too, I think, with people. So when you're trying to help uh, church leaders deal with this with their own context relative to people in the categories that they put them, what are some of the things that you try to do with them to
Mhm.
help them with this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I remember one of my former pastors used to say, "This is not that." And when I think about even that phrase, something that may have happened previously doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen again the same way. An experience or an encounter that we have with an individual doesn't necessarily mean that all individuals are the same. So even when I'm on a cohort, and if there is a perception about, let's say, Black Lives Matter, and they think, well, uh, blacks are violent. You know, there it's not true social justice because of the way that their behavior is in the streets, or or the way they're engaging with police officers. Well, that could be misinformation, and to attach that to the entire culture is unfair. And so I like to use myself, and I'll say, well, I believe in Black Lives Matter. Why? Because I believe that we have an equality situation, right? I believe there's some things from a social justice that we need to balance out in our society. And so if I believe that, right, and I believe in the basics of what BLM is standing for, then I turn it over to them and say, do I appear to be a Black person that's violent? Do I appear to be a person of color that wants to fight the police? And they're like, well, no. And then I'm like, well, you shouldn't attach that to the entire race, right? No differently than if you take race out of it. Let's say there's a woman in leadership that happens in a specific role, and maybe it just happened to be a person that the timing wasn't good for her, so she just had a lot stuff going on and she was overwhelmed, right? And it didn't work out. Well, now to feel like the trend is, well, women can't manage at that high level because they're always balancing emotions. That's unfair. That's ridiculous, Rick, right? And so, just people in general, we can't say this is that.
That's really good. And I love what you always come back to in our conversations, Fred, that even in your illustration there, what I heard you doing there was saying, what about the relationship that's happening right here?
Absolutely.
Are you reacting this way to me right now? Because I think that's one of those universal things where people say, well, no, I'm not right now.
Right.
That really exposes that sort of compartmentalized way we think about these entities that are out there. It becomes less impersonal, and it becomes now personal.
Right.
And I feel like that's part of your strategy, is to make this personal. Is that right?
Absolutely. What does it look like in the conversation and the dialogue that you're having with the person that's right in front of you that shows that the reach can look like this in other spaces too?
Yeah, that's good. Well, for those of you watching this little conversation, you heard Fred mention his work with a cohort, and what he's talking about is Fred's a coach. He coaches cohorts from church leadership teams, and he coaches individuals. He coaches people that are from different church leadership teams, all in the same cohort. He has lots of iterations of what he's doing here. And what he's doing is working through the 5 R's with people in the same way that you just saw us do just now. And I have heard story after story from Fred about how this works to bring freedom to the captivity a group of people has, because that's what it really is. That's what we're talking about right now. You're captive to your own stereotypes and perceptions. What does it mean to have freedom from that? Jesus came to give us freedom from captivity. And I think, Fred, your process of doing this actually leverages freedom in groups of people. So we'll have more information below the video that you're watching right now on how to connect with Fred, see if he might be able to help you with your challenges that you're facing right now in your organization or your church staff. So check those out. We'll see you again next time.
Thank you.